From the moment he stepped onto his first soundstage until the day he walked off his last, Elvis Presley created a motion picture legacy that will never be forgotten. Between 1956 and 1969, he starred in 32 films. Some good.
Now you know what I do for an encore.
Some, well,
I'm the Sheik of Araby.
Elvis's Hollywood years parallel the milestones in his private life. Sometimes what went on behind the scenes was more interesting than what was captured on celluloid, because the real Elvis Presley was a lot more compelling than the two and sometimes one-dimensional characters he played on the big screen.
Oh, shut up.
Unfortunately, Presley's enormous success at the box office only hampered his hopes of becoming a respected dramatic actor. And that is the dark side of Elvis's Hollywood years, a story that began with infinite possibilities nearly half a century ago.
Well, we're going to get things started out with a young man who is making his 6th appearance on stage shows. He's that dynamic singer of songs who incidentally leaves for Hollywood tonight for a screen test. We wish him a lot of luck. Here he is, Elvis Presley.
By the spring of 1956, Elvis's television appearances and record sales had catapulted him from total obscurity to national superstardom. So it was no surprise when Elvis left for Tinseltown to take his shot at the silver screen.
First of all, you get a hit record, and you go on television, and then you go to Hollywood. That's how it happens. So I went to Hollywood, and I wasn't ready for that town, and they wasn't ready for me, you know. So it's all new to me. I was like 19 or 20 years old. So.
When Elvis was in Memphis before he went out to Hollywood, he studied Hollywood in his own way. He would go see movies day in and day out. He'd watch movies. He'd go to the movie theaters, and he'd watch movie after movie. He was an usher in a movie theater. He got to see motion pictures over and over, and he studied. He did his homework. He noticed that Clark Gable wore his shirt open, didn't wear an undershirt. He copied that. He noticed that Brando and Jimmy Dean and Tony Curtis and those guys had dark hair, and they didn't do a lot of smiling. And actually that worked for him, because when he got to Hollywood, if you'll notice, all of his early publicity pictures, he's not smiling. Because he said he felt that the guys who smiled a whole lot and had that typical Hollywood blonde hair, blue eyes, smile look actually faded out quicker than the guys who had the demeanor of a Brando or a Jimmy Dean.
If you come into a place, there's nobody there to meet you, you start wondering, you know.
Surely.
Very nice talking to you, sir. We're going to have to run.
All right. Thank you very much.
Elvis arrived in Hollywood and went straight to Paramount Studios, where he met with legendary producer Hal Wallace, who had arranged for a screen test. It was the beginning of a very productive relationship.
I remember the day Elvis Presley first walked on this lot, his first motion picture set, and he was already very well established. And one of our most prominent producers was Hal Wallace, and he saw in Elvis Presley the same thing he saw in Kirk Douglas and Charlton Heston and the other famous people that he had found. He saw a big movie star, and he brought him here on the lot.
The first half of the screen test featured Elvis lip-syncing blue suede shoes while strumming a stringless prop guitar.
Sound ready? All ready. Let's make a take. Come on. Turn them over. Speed. Action.
So one for the money, two for the show, three to get ready. Now go, cat, go. Bang with the hole for my blue suede shoes.
Cut. Fine. Great.
The second half was a dramatic scene from The Rainmaker, which was slated to be Presley's movie debut. These rare photographs are all that survive of the long-lost Rainmaker screen test.
I was asked by Hal Wallace to come and see a screen test that he had made of a young man named Elvis Presley. And I had heard of Elvis Presley, but I had never seen him work. And I had great trepidation about seeing that, because I didn't think that, from what I had known of Elvis, that he was screen material. I thought he was a passing fancy for young children, especially young girls. But I was very pleasantly surprised. As a matter of fact, my socks were knocked off seeing what I saw on the screen.
Wallace was equally impressed, and after some tough negotiations with Colonel Parker, signed Elvis to a 7-year contract.
Colonel Parker knew about Hal Wallace, knew of his background, knew of the great things he'd done for so many stars and the variety of pictures he had made. Also, Hal Wallace, the producer, knew the importance of keeping Colonel Parker, as you say, in the loop of what was happening, because Colonel Parker really controlled Elvis. So there was a happy marriage between Hal Wallace and Colonel Parker.
Elvis, you made a screen test. Can you tell us the result of that now?
Yeah, we got a 7-year contract with Paramount Pictures. We'll have a movie coming out, I don't know when, but we started making it in June. It's a movie with Burt Lancaster and Katharine Hepburn called The Rainmaker.
Wallace put The Rainmaker into production, but with one minor change in the casting. As planned, Burt Lancaster and Katharine Hepburn starred in the colorful drama. But in the role that had been intended for Elvis, Hal Wallace cast newcomer Earl Holliman.
I was offered a part in The Rainmaker.
I see. Quite a dramatic bit, isn't it?
Well, it was, but it wasn't the character in it. I didn't feel I could do it the way that it should be done.
The real reason Elvis dropped out was that the part of Hepburn's kid brother was just too small for the film debut of Elvis Presley.
Without having to trick him.
If Elvis had done The Rainmaker and had done okay in the film, he might have gradually worked his way up to other parts. Who knows?
After The Rainmaker fell through, Hal Wallace set about trying to find a script worthy of the king. Unable to find a suitable project at Paramount, Wallace loaned Elvis to 20th Century Fox for a Civil War drama entitled The Reno Brothers, co-starring Richard Egan, Deborah Paget, and William Campbell.
One day I received a call. They asked me to go up to a certain projection room at 20th Century Fox. They were showing wardrobe of different people, including Deborah Paget. When this beautiful girl's picture came up on the screen, I heard somebody behind me, and I suddenly realized it was Elvis, say, "Golly, boy, is she a looker." He says, "Am I going to kiss her?" And I hear Parker, the colonel, say, "Yeah, I think so, a couple of times." He says, "I can't wait." Finally, the lights went up. Richard Egan and myself were chatting, and all of a sudden I get a touch on my shoulder, and I turn around, and it's Elvis. He said, "Mr. Campbell," he says, "could I talk to you?" I said, "Sure." He says, "You know, this is the first time I ever did any acting. I want to do a good job in my first picture." He said, "I was wondering if you'd help me out." I said, "What do you mean, help you out?" "Elvis." I said, "They're going to photograph you up, down, over, under, left, right." I said, "You're going to look like one of the best actors in America."
Presley as Clint Reno.
And Elvis was doing very well, I thought, for what he was given. This was not, this wasn't the greatest dialogue in the world. It was a pretty pedestrian film in the sense that it was a typical Western kind of motif, the bad guy, the good guy, the morality play, and all of this stuff.
The film was intended as a straight drama without songs.
Say you want your lover. Say you ain't laid awake every night by my side thinking of him. Wishing I was Vance. Wishing you'd waited for him and never married me.
Presley was clearly excited about making a serious picture.
It's a dramatic picture. It's a love story, but it's not Western.
Who are the stars?
Deborah Paget and Richard Egan. It's a very good cast, and they have a lot of big stars in the supporting cast.
When Elvis was first signed to the Reno Brothers, a Confederate love story, it was a straight Western, and he was really looking forward to appearing in a straight role, not non-singing. That was a big deal to him. But again, the studio paid for Elvis Presley, and pretty soon a few songs worked their way into the screenplay. The next thing you know, he's rocking and rolling out on the front porch of a Confederate homestead. It was kind of goofy.
They call me poor boy, poor boy, poor boy.
4 songs were added, including a tune that became an instant classic and the film's new title.
Tell me you are mine.
Since the picture now had musical numbers, it was Campbell's turn to get advice from Elvis.
Bobby Webb, the director, came over and he said, Bill, he said, I want you to bone up on that number that Elvis sings on the porch. I went into orbit. I said, I wasn't hired to sing with Elvis or anybody else. I said, I'm not a singer. And I'm sitting there looking at the sheet music, and Elvis was watching this, and I had said a couple of times, I'm sorry, Elvis, the way I feel. And when it was over, he came over laughing, and he said, Bill, he says, what I'm going to do every day, when we have some time, we'll come in here, and we'll go through it, and I'll choreograph this out with you. All I had to do was clap my hands and go boom, 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 but nobody else had anything else to do. And I did it, and I was still embarrassed, but years and years later, of course, I'm very proud of that moment, you know, being the first one to actually do that with him. We were shooting on the back lot. I will never forget this. And he had his musicians there, and we all ate out there. And Elvis sees all these kids there. And it was supposed to be, if you remember, it was supposed to be like a county fair type thing we were at. And Elvis took his guitar and jumped on the stage, and his musicians, it had been set up, they jumped up there, and he gave up his lunch to play for the people and for the kids. He had a great humanity, you know. It was really something. And he did not have a typical ego. I got to the point where I loved him. And it really worried me. And I thought to myself, when Parker came to me, he said, I'd like you to travel with Elvis. I said, what do you mean, travel with Elvis? I would like you to be his companion. Watch over him. I said, what are you talking? I've got a career. He says, I promise you in every picture you will have the second lead. And I said, look it, Colonel, I appreciate it. And I know that I'd make myself a bundle of bucks. But I said, I can't do it. I've got my own career. Don't you understand?
You just finished a picture with Elvis Presley.
Yes, and Richard Egan. It's called Love Me Tender.
How'd you like working with this man, Elvis Presley?
Oh, very much, Dave. He's a very nice person. He's very cooperative and friendly.
Where are you off to now in your bejeweled chariot there?
I'm on my way home for a party I'm giving for the cast and crew of the picture.
On November 16, 1956, Love Me Tender premiered at the Paramount Theater in New York. Thousands of screaming fans showed up to celebrate Elvis's motion picture debut, a publicity stunt arranged by Colonel Parker. Love Me Tender earned back its $1 million production cost in just 3 days. Elvis's status as a box office champ was established with his very first film. But reviews were as mixed as the audience's reaction to the ending.
I remember seeing Love Me Tender, and it was really hysterical because when Elvis dies at the end, all the males in the audience cheered and all the girls were crying. There was a real schism between the Elvis Presley fanatics.
I did not like Love Me Tender because he died in it, and I didn't want him to die. I wanted Deborah Paget to fall in love with him, and I wanted him to end up with a girl, and it didn't happen, so I was sad.
The film also made an impression on a couple of future rockers.
Morrison was a big fan of Love Me Tender. Elvis was great in his very first movie. You got to see the man raw and real. And for me, also Love Me Tender. I say for both of us, it's Love Me Tender.
By now, Paramount had found a project for Presley, which began production in January of 1957. As with Love Me Tender, the title tune became a big hit. Loving You was written and directed by Hollywood veteran Hal Cantor.
Hal Wallace sent me to Memphis, Tennessee to meet Elvis in person and to talk about the show, but also to see him in action and to learn as much about his method of operation as I possibly could, and eventually to incorporate some of what I had learned in the film itself, because I had not only written the screenplay, I was now to direct it.
Elvis found Hal Cantor to be the sort of person who would give you the shirt off his back, literally.
I was wearing a black velour shirt that my wife had given me just before I left to go to Memphis. And Elvis admired the shirt. He said, "Where'd you get that?" And I said, "Do you like it?" He said, "Oh, yeah, I like it very much." I said, "If you got another shirt, I'll give you this one." He couldn't believe that I had given him that shirt. He was so proud of that black velour shirt. When he showed up in Hollywood several weeks later to start rehearsing the show, he was wearing that shirt. And I said to him, "That's a good-looking shirt you're wearing there, Elvis." I said, "Where'd you get that?" He said, "Oh, some fan gave it to me." I said, "Okay."
You don't care about me or Tex or anybody, just yourself.
You've got 15 minutes to get on that stage and find out if you've even got a future.
He was opposite a lovely young lady that Hal Wallace had found and was on the contract to us here at Paramount, Dolores Hart. They did 2 pictures together, his first picture and his second picture together. And you could tell on the screen and on the set the adulation and the respect and perhaps love that they had for each other. She left our business, became a nun, and she's now, I think, a Mother Superior.
The Loving You storyline was loosely based on Elvis's own experiences with fame, fortune, and controversy.
Loving You was the essence of a great rock and roll movie. I mean, he played this character, Deke Rivers, this poor kid who works his way up through rock and roll and then gets attacked for being too overtly sexual on stage, and then he goes on national TV to defend himself, and then does the most overtly sexual number you've ever seen on camera. I mean, full bump and grind, running up and down the aisles. I mean, it was just amazing to watch.
Loving You also gave Elvis's backup band a chance to appear on camera.
He said, "You guys want to do the movies too?" We said, "Well, yeah, I guess we can do 1 or 2 and see what happens." And so we did Loving You, which was, I thought was a good movie. I thought we had good material there.
As with Love Me Tender, the film made quite an impression on another budding young rocker.
Loving You was amazing. Just the way he was dressed, the bandana around his neck, and so memorable.
Once again, the film was a huge success. Once again, reviews were mixed, with Elvis his own worst critic.
How do you rate yourself as an actor?
Pretty bad. I mean, that's something you learn through experience. I think that maybe I might accomplish something at it through the years.
You think it's just the sake of acting natural? Don't you do that in your last 2 pictures? I'd say you have.
In some scenes, I was pretty natural. In others, I was trying to act. And when you start trying to act, you're dead.
How did you find Hal Wallace as a producer-director?
He's a very, very, very fine gentleman.
Did he help you out, or who was the big help and aid in your show, Loving You?
Well, there's nobody who helps you out. They have a director and a producer. And as far as the acting and as far as singing and all, you're on your own.
They predict that Elvis Presley will be another James Dean. Now, have you heard that?
I've heard something about it, but I would never compare myself in any way to James Dean, because James Dean was a genius in acting.
Mm-hmm.
Although I'll say that I sure would like to. I mean, I guess there's a lot of actors in Hollywood that would like to have had the ability that James Dean had.
Mm-hmm.
But I would never compare myself with James Dean in any way.
The Presley-Dean comparison was dismissed by Hal Wallace, who said, "We did not sign Elvis as a second Jimmy Dean. We signed him as a #1 Elvis Presley." Wallace wasn't the only one of his generation to appreciate Elvis's considerable gifts. More and more of the studio brass were starting to admire Presley's talents.
He was a very unique talent. I had completely misjudged him at first. I think most people my age misjudged him.
The older people who were in the business then were
had their opinions set already, that this was something that was very questionable. Remembering what era that was, that, well, isn't this the kid who moves his hips funny and isn't it vulgar? And he disarmed him so fast because he was very pleasant to work with. It is absolutely flatly true that there was never a guy who worked with him that didn't like him. You know, he'd hit makeup in the morning. He'd start with getting coffee for the hairdresser, then he'd get coffee for the makeup man, then he'd get coffee for himself. That goes a long way in this business.
Elvis Presley was one among equals on the set, one among equals. He wasn't above anybody. He was there. And the people had that feeling. And he was so professional. God, he was so professional.
He was there every morning at 9 o'clock on the butt. He was never late. He knew his lines, and the funny part about it is he knew the other people's lines too, because he had that photographic memory, you know. And he was real good with his lines, very cooperative, didn't argue with anybody, because he was trying to let it be known in Hollywood he wanted to be a serious actor. He wasn't out there just fooling around trying to make a rock and roll movie, or so he wanted to learn the trade and become a part of that Hollywood movie situation.
To make the best of that situation, Elvis tried to make the movie set feel more like home.
We would usually go into the set, and he would go in and sit down at the piano and start singing spirituals. This is the way that he got in the mood. This is the way he relaxed. It just took that for him to relax and to feel at home and to feel at ease with the people around him. And this is what he had to have to be himself.
Being himself also involved a little fun and games during those long periods of downtime.
One day I'm going to lunch, and as I'm walking into the commissary door, coming around the corner is this tall fellow with a pompadour and sideburns and a red shirt and jeans and white bucks. And I thought, wow, this is a mighty looking fella. Had no idea who he was. Looked kind of familiar. And as we walk in together, the place is packed. And a lot of people were looking over at him. I didn't know it was because of the sideburns or they knew who he was. Make a long story short, we finished lunch. And he said, "You want to have some fun?" Why not? You know, 17-year-old kid. Why not have some fun? All the sound stages have these metal ladders bolted to the top of the sound stages. And he just heads on up. And he says, "Come on." And I follow him up to the top. He reaches in his pocket and he pulls out balloons. He's got all these balloons. So we go ahead and we fill them up and we start tossing them, and then look down and people are jumping and bouncing and we're backing up, and it's like 2 10-year-old kids. We are laughing. He's laughing so hard he's literally rolling on the tar paper on the roof in hysterics. Then he goes ahead and he's got this big one, and Pop, he lets it go, and he bounces back and says, "I gotta go. I just wound up hitting my producer, Hal Wallace, on the head. I'm in trouble."
By the spring of 1957, Elvis's schedule was so jam-packed with concerts, recording sessions, and movie making, he barely had time to move into his new mansion, Graceland, before returning to Hollywood for his next picture, this time at prestigious MGM.
Being in radio and television in Memphis and dreaming about Hollywood and hearing about those big sound stages and driving through the gates of MGM and all of the fantastic things you heard about in movie studios, MGM was the top of the line at that time. It was the biggest studio in Hollywood, the most famous studio in Hollywood. And as we drove through the studios that first day, I'll never forget it. We were in that limousine, and the gate guard was a guy named Kenny Hollywood.
I got a call that there was a commotion at the Dahlberg Gate at the front of MGM over in Culver City. And they said that Elvis Presley is coming in, and we're just overwhelmed with female workers who are trying to get at the car and everything else. And I said, "Well, take the kids and chase them away. You're policemen." And it's, "No, you don't understand. It's not kids. It's middle-aged and elderly women who come out of the executive building."
The studio's first order of business was selecting songs from the various tracks Elvis had recorded for his new film, tentatively titled Jailhouse Kid.
The producer, Pam Berman, says, "Alex, what number of the 10 you've heard has the most production value? And I said, well, there's only one, Jailhouse Rock. And he said, oh, no, we can't use that. That goes over the titles. And I said, the titles? And he said, yes. And I said, you're wasting a great number. I said, I don't mean to be bragging, but that's a show-stopping number.
But some believe it was Elvis himself who did the choreography.
Watch him dance in Jailhouse Rock. You know, Elvis choreographed that routine in Jailhouse Rock. So the man, the man was a dancer.
So did Elvis or Alex do the choreography? The truth is somewhere in between.
When Alex Romero, who was the choreographer of Jailhouse Rock, first presented the dance sequence for Jailhouse Rock, Elvis shook his head. He said, that's not me. I can't do that, Alex. I appreciate, what you've done here. He wanted Elvis to do more of a Gene Nelson, Fred Astaire type. Elvis said, it's not me. I'll try it. And Elvis, being the cooperative guy, he got up and tried. He said, see, Alex, it's not me. And then the next one, Alex said, Elvis, I tell you what, let me incorporate your stage act into what I want to do, and let's see if that'll work. And he went home that night, came back the next day, and he had taken Elvis's stage act and incorporated that into a dance sequence. And Elvis said, hey, I can do that, that's me. And in one take, right there in the rehearsal hall at MGM, Elvis had it down. And then, of course, it became historic in being Elvis's best dance sequence in a motion picture.
Walking through a party in the county jail. The prison band was there, they began to wail. The band was jumping and the joint.
The sequence was way ahead of its time and would serve as the prototype for what would later be called the music video. Presley's enthusiasm while rehearsing the Jailhouse Rock number led to a potentially catastrophic health scare.
In those days, you did musical pieces that are pure music. You'd do them ahead of time in pre-production. And that number, Jailhouse Rock, we did do in pre-production. And we were up on stage 27. And Elvis came over and said, Dr. what's his name, the dentist, the lot dentist, is making me a cat.